I'll say I'm definitely still excited. I think there's definitely some like wiping away of the rose-colored glasses that's happened. Like especially early on when we were still figuring out what Ethereum was and what you could do with protocols. We worked on a lot of things that were essentially rebuilding the philosophies or structures of existing infrastructure in Web 2. Like DAOs and governance, can be symbolic of governments or other kind of governing bodies. And I think early on, there was a lot of sort of ambition that everything we're doing is fundamentally new. And I don't think that's quite what's happening. And now we're starting to tease out what is the new element.
Today, I'm joined by Eva. She is the director at the Graph Foundation and also one of the core contributors and investors at eGirl Capital. So really excited for you to join the podcast. Been looking forward to this one and making it happen. Thank you for joining.
Thanks for having me, Logan.
I would love just to start off with a little bit about yourself and how you got into the industry. I think it's always a little bit unique on everybody's backgrounds. Everybody kind of comes from a different path. Sometimes the engineering rabbit hole, sometimes it's just more on like the financial side. So what drew you in?
Yeah, absolutely. So my background's actually in economics. And so I was a management consultant for mostly financial services companies and working in New York and Canada. And then my brother actually, who's a software developer, had started working with Consensus and learning about Ethereum. I think this was late 2016. And it was very closely tied to some of my work functionally related to payments. And the more I learned about blockchain, the more I started recommending it to our clients or our internal project teams. And really no one was having it. We were very early, but it really entranced me, and I felt like I needed to leave the space that I was in and really start working on something more revolutionary. So, really thanks to my brother for helping me learn about Ethereum so quickly, and then helping me get the confidence to join the space itself. And so I've been here, I think, about 5 years. Yeah, exactly. So I spent 2017 learning, hadn't quite left my job, and then left. And then since 2018, I've been working in the space full time. I worked at a few different startups, including Go, Malik Dao, the Ethereum Foundation, kind of jumping around wherever I felt was most kind of important. And then a few years ago, I came upon the Graph and really realized the infrastructure layer, aside from just the blockchain L1 itself, hadn't had as much development yet. And really the data space specifically was such a needed aspect for any kind of dApp development or builder ecosystem. So I've been working with the Graph ever since.
Amazing. Amazing story. Maybe before jumping like directly into Graph, you've worked at, as you mentioned, some pretty cool companies. How was it working at the Ethereum Foundation?
Yeah, so the Ethereum Foundation is sort of this, amoeba of contributors. At the time I was one of a few contributors. We were focusing on how can we scale kind of the entry point into Ethereum. Getting people like myself or just like non-crypto, non-engineering focused to enter the space, because we need business developers, we need product managers, marketing, et cetera. So that was really cool. And a lot of the learnings there, I've been able to take into the Graph Foundation and what we do, and how do we maintain sort of the neutral elements for a sustainable protocol ecosystem.
Amazing. It's always, I would say, looking back, it's, I think, hard to make the decisions to leave or to move on to another venue. But once you've kind of done it and you can look back and connect the dots, it always looks a little bit more easy in hindsight. So very impressive. Maybe diving deeper into the Graph, I think the Graph is an amazing tool that engineers love and use, but maybe it's not as front-facing of a product. So some people know about it, obviously the engineering side, but for those that are not as familiar with the core components, could you just describe what the Graph does and why it's so pivotal on the engineers?
Yeah, absolutely. So the most basic way to describe what the Graph is we are organizing blockchain data and enabling access to that data. So starting from the developer perspective, this is really our first use case, is developers need access to blockchain data to be able to build applications. And when we say data, it really could be anything from, trades and pricing for pairs to, the marketplace data for an NFT to voting data for a DAO. So like really the point of the Graph is to support all data use cases, regardless of what you want to build on whichever blockchain. We are blockchain agnostic. We believe in supporting the developers with whatever choices they decide to make. bringing it sort of more vision setting, our goal is to provide access to all data services. So our bread and butter right now is something called a subgraph, which is just a standard API. It's an access point for developers to query data. But the future is different kinds of data services, different kinds of transformations that are streamed from the graph. So one new example is something called substreams. It's this really incredibly efficient new architecture that's coming to the graph that makes it easy to process raw blockchain data in a parallel format. So it's much more efficient, much higher performance. And this will not only improve the performance of subgraphs, but actually opens up a new field of data that the graph can serve. So really our goal is, we've started with this developer-facing tool, this API, but over the next several years, there should be different kinds of data services and also different kinds of users being able to access it. So you can imagine a world where you can actually SQL query blockchain data directly from the graph, and data scientists then are actually interacting with the graph directly.
That would be amazing. I kind of a data nerd myself, love the SQL aspect. And I think the hard part, as you mentioned, is kind of being able to index that data, sequence it, and turn it into something useful. But the blockchain is rich with data. It just has to do some refinements, and very appreciative that the graph is kind of there to support that endeavor.
Yeah, absolutely.
In terms of, you said ultimately the graph recently launched parallel processing, correct? Or parallel...
yeah, that's a great way of wording it. Parallel processing architecture.
Okay, perfect. So eventually, you initially starting out on Ethereum, focused a lot on the EVM. Does this new capability with the parallel processing ultimately unlock non-EVM architectures?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is actually one of the most exciting elements of this. So substreams themselves are like a data source. So you'll query the substream directly, and that can be for any chain. But what's even more exciting is the backend infrastructure of these substreams is called Firehose. You can imagine literally like a fire hose of data just coming from a blockchain. And that actually should be more closely tied with client teams. So a lot of what we're doing now is actually speaking with teams like Aptos, Starkware. We actually had contributors in their ecosystems just pick up our Firehose code and implement it with their existing chain. And the goal being that this Firehose infrastructure, which was originally built for the graph, can actually, make other chain operations just much more efficient. So hopefully this actually improves the operations of nodes for other chains aside from just like graph node based chains.
That's awesome. Yeah, I am a big fan of Aptos and what they're doing. Their parallel processing is pretty unique in how they do it. And so awesome that you're able to kind of be chain agnostic. I think as pivotal of a role of indexing and being able to query data, kind of structure it, really every chain is going to need it regardless of kind of the different architecture types.
Yeah, and our viewpoint is like it's really not our place to decide how a developer chooses their ecosystem or what chain and which trade-offs they want to make. But it is our role to really create the most efficient way for these developers to build applications and creating standards across those chains. So a lot of what we think about the graph as the role is like a unifier where you might not eventually need to know the underlying languages of those chains, but maybe you'll just use subgraphs across those chains, and then the interface you're interacting with is the graph.
Interesting. Very interesting. I love it. I think that is kind of some of the missing building blocks that has really kind of held the industry back, just because blockchains are very rudimentary to kind of build upon, at least prior to the graph's existence, because these basic functionalities that we've had in the Web 2 world of like well-built IDEs, well-built infrastructure on the indexing side just don't exist. And I think people often forget that we're really rebuilding everything from scratch, and it's not easy.
Yeah. And furthermore, we have to build it decentralized. I know that there's still this, what should be decentralized and what shouldn't. In our view, it's really anything that's needed to maintain the user relationship and the developer relationship. So, yes, you could have your smart contracts that are immutable, but if nobody can access that application or access their assets without literally being another smart contract developer, we haven't really achieved what our goal was, because all these people can't actually use the thing or access the thing. So for us, decentralizing the data layer is just one piece, but there's a lot of other projects like Filecoin, Arweave that are decentralizing other layers of the stack. stack. And at fruition, we need all layers of the stack to be decentralized so that they are resilient and censorship resistant.
100%. Maybe just pulling on that thread, could you talk a little bit more about what parts of the stack that you have decentralized at the graph, but also some of those partnerships as well?
Yeah. So like you said, we focus on indexing. So our crux has been the network itself, which is decentralizing the actual node operators. So the teams that are running the servers, instead of relying on one hosted service as the graph has been in the past and how we started, we think the scalable way and really the only way forward is to have hundreds, if not thousands of indexers that are processing data. And again, they make their own trade-offs, right? Like developers could choose different pricing or different latency, and those indexers provide that opportunity. So that's one layer of decentralization. Another would be just the actual data itself, because subgraphs and actually substreams also, and all future data services are open source. That means that one developer that's built a subgraph can actually benefit another development team because they can now work on that same open source API. So we're really creating a decentralized ecosystem of data that's much more composable than centralized parties just operating by themselves. And the last thing is, like you said, partnerships. Like the graph is here to index all data. So really, we're here to make sure that if you want to query, IPFS data or RWE files, that you will be able to do that. So we're continuously rolling out support for new chains, new types of file data services, and we'll see what else Web3 throws at us.
Yeah, the industry always keeps us on our toes. Every week there's something new, and I wish it would not move as fast, but I think it's exciting that ultimately we've chosen an industry to work in that is so moving so quickly, it's hard to keep up.
It's definitely exciting at all times.
Yes, for sure. Maybe pivoting a little bit, you've been in the industry now for a while. You've seen some of the ups and flows. You've seen bad actors blow up. You've seen people come in, build really awesome products, people leave. What has your as you've kind of been in the industry longer, has your view of like crypto changed at all? Or are you still like excited about the vision that initially brought you in?
I will say I'm definitely still excited. I think there's definitely some like wiping away of the rose-colored glasses that's happened. Like especially early on when we were still figuring out what Ethereum was and what you could do with protocols. We worked on a lot of things that were essentially rebuilding the philosophies or structures of existing infrastructure in Web 2. So, like DAOs and governance, can be symbolic of governments or other kind of governing bodies. And I think early on, there was a lot of sort of ambition that everything we're doing is fundamentally new. And I don't think that's quite what's happening. And now we're starting to tease out what is the new element. So things like being able to coordinate remotely in a decentralized manner with an intermediary, that itself is the new element, not governance itself. So I think right now we're starting to figure out more of what is the actual benefit of a blockchain, like specifically what features are provided instead of just thinking about let's put everything on chain. And I'm excited to see more innovation here. Like, I would say we haven't quite seen as much innovation at the app layer since maybe the flash loan. But it'd be cool to see more of these kinds of things because in my opinion, the flash loan is, fundamentally a new product that Web3 enables, that in the grand scheme of all financial products, whether Web 2 or Web 3, it has a standalone benefit regardless of the blockchain behind it. So I think over the next few years, we should focus more on these things. Another example that comes to mind is privacy. So everything with zero knowledge proofs, it fundamentally creates new products. We've never been able to share our KYC without an intermediary knowing exactly the detail behind it. But there's a future now where we could have zero knowledge proofs in the background and really maintain privacy in a new way.
Yeah, 100%. Maybe on the first topic that you mentioned, DAOs, I too was I would agree, rosy-eyed going into it and thought maybe DAOs were like a brand new structure that we could kind of coordinate. And I do believe it is, but it doesn't mean that we still kind of remove the structure. We still have to kind of coordinate. Could you talk about, I believe you said you were involved in some DAOs early on, even I believe the Graph has a DAO as well. Could you talk about removing some of those rosy colored glasses and just what you've observed just being a prominent member in some of these DAOs?
Yeah. So, I mean, I can start with some pros. there's definitely pros to coordination. I think that's definitely a new feature, without needing some kind of legal or Web2 approval process. There is this permissionless path that people could either receive funding or put up proposals. So that's very exciting. I think one thing, at least on my side and people I've worked with, we maybe mistaken was politics and the role that politics play in governance. And I think in the beginning, there was this idea that blockchains could literally obliterate politics, like the DAOs were somehow politics free. And I think it's actually quite the opposite. And we almost need to like bridge the gap of all of these sort of like standard human, like Maslow hierarchy of needs elements that still play a role in daily markets and human behavior. So, on the politics front, like in our experience with the DAOs in our ecosystem, we've definitely seen that play out. We've also seen, because of the DAO structure, we're using Malik Dao with DAO House. There's all these checks and balances that even if there is politics at play, that you can actually remove it. So things like rage quits, things like guild kicks, where the DAO actually decides that someone should be removed. These are really interesting mechanisms that then solve for some of what we have. Whereas, I don't think the Senate or most governing bodies have the ability to really kick someone out as efficiently as we've been able to with DAOs. So I think there's a bit more blending that we need to do of like older ideologies, older philosophies that have kind of, existed for centuries, regardless of which technology was being used. And how do we then blend that more with our new technology?
Yeah. I do fully agree. I think I was also optimistic that politics could possibly be removed, but humans are humans, and at the end of the day, this is tech, and we built it. So I think can't remove politics.
I think we can make it more manageable, basically.
Yeah. And to your point, like being able to have it a little bit more open, being able to coordinate. And like kicking people out, being able to vote on like things in like more coordinated fashion. These are all things that I think DAOs do uniquely enable that were not previously there.
Right. Totally.
So making some progress, maybe slow and steady as the industry has kind of been. One thing that I think that I was personally surprised by in the past bull market was just how large NFTs actually became. I was curious, like, even like prior to joining the Graph or even at the Ethereum Foundation, is that it's something that you thought was going to be as prominent as it ultimately became?
I would say I've always been very excited about NFTs. So like CryptoKitties were definitely my first foray into this. But I also really like art. Yeah. I also really like art. So I make my own NFTs sometimes on the side. So for me, there is a bit of an angle here of I understand the benefit directly to me as a user. I often like to say, like, I've been able to sell several NFTs and sort of create almost my own audience that has, followed along with my work that would have been nearly impossible for me to do in Web 2 without sort of the ecosystem that Web 3 provides. And what I mean by that is, for example, in Web 2 world, you can have an Etsy, you can have a gallery, but even those are quite challenging to bootstrap. With a gallery, you need approval, you need to be, admitted, or there's some competition. Whereas with NFTs, you can literally create anything you want. You're creating your own audience, your own marketing, your own distribution method, even like how you want to build out the ecosystem of supporters. I see a lot of artists these days doing almost like loyalty based drops where, if you've been a contributor or a purchaser of an NFT in the past, then you get to now participate in the artist's future. So I'm personally really excited. I think I've always been aligned here. I would personally like to see a bit more innovation in the NFT space from the technology side. So I like to call this potentially create fi, so we've got like decentralized finance, but where's the creator finance innovation? Because to me, the NFT honestly feels a bit primitive and boring to an extent. Like it's really just a token standard. Yeah. And we've had a lot of discussions around royalties and is that possible to enforce on chain? And it turns out it's not quite possible. But to me, this is like skimming the surface of what we can do to actually fundamentally create new mechanisms. Like where's the flash loan for the creator industry? Like what is that one unique thing aside from just being a blockchain and you can, own your rights? What is that other mechanism set that really transforms that industry?
Yeah, I fully agree. It seems like we have really truly scratched the surface of what the NFT standard can ultimately create. And I, like you, am super excited about, I think, ultimately breaking up some of the monopolies that currently exist on the creator side. I think a big one ultimately being YouTube. I know Snapchat does stuff. Elon stepping into the game with Twitter content. But having kind of that Web3 native version hasn't really taken off yet. Maybe Lens is probably one of the more prominent ones. I know Deso also took a crack at it. Why don't you think the creator side has taken off as much as the NFT side?
This is a great question. I would say, like, attention wise, we've probably captured more artist attention than the attention of developers necessarily working in the art space. And there might be that there's just not that many. But I would wonder, like, how many people from Snapchat and YouTube have actually decided to leave Web 2 and work in Web 3. And to me, this points to just a larger challenge that we have of sort of diminishing returns of some of our engagement strategies. So, for example, at the Graph, we're really reassessing the role of hackathons. And especially early on in Ethereum, like, hackathons were really important. It was really the only way you were getting developer attention and you were engaging. And now it's not so clear if they're the right place for new developer adoption. It's still a great place to, like, meet new teams, but is that really the place that the Snapchat product manager is going to be visiting to then learn about Web3? Or what is the funnel for us to get more product front end people involved? Because in my opinion, I think we've done a pretty good job of kind of connecting the in group. But really, like, how do we get more of the out group involved here? And that might not always be a hackathon that has a capacity of 15,000 people.
Yeah, the hackathons, I mean, I went to early hackathon, I think in 2018, right after the bear market for Ethereum and or the entire industry in 2017. And I was actually amazed by the energy in 2018 around the hackathon. And it was those kind of events that brought the engineers together and kind of continued the enthusiasm while prices were definitely depressed from what they were earlier in that bull market cycle. If it's not hackathons, where do you ultimately see the next engineers or cohort to come into the ecosystem? Is it kind of just tapping into the Web 2 talent that exists?
Great question. So, like, I would say we still love hackathons. To me, they're the magical space. They're like the protected, safe space. It's really where you're getting to know everyone. So I don't want to diminish those efforts. But I do think we need to do a bit more of us entering existing spaces rather than having people come to our spaces. So instead of necessarily recruiting people to come to our hackathons, like, are we the Web3 teams showing up in the existing Web2 spaces? You know, for us, maybe that's GraphQL, maybe that's like the Rust community. What are the other, places and environments where developers are engaging, or they would learn about something without having already been predisposed to Web3. Because I think a lot of, the last few years has been predicated on initiative and entrepreneurial spirit. So people like myself or other people leaving their stable job to then join this revolution. And that is not something that necessarily scales. Not everyone is the revolutionary contributor. And so this next wave of contributors, like, how do we actually tap into their motivation? Like, what is their religion? And I think that needs us going a little bit more into their spaces, like I said, than necessarily us bringing them over.
I do agree. In that point of view, I think one of the large pushbacks that I get from, even when I talk with limited partners, is what is the killer app for crypto? Why hasn't there been a killer app outside of just pure speculation? And I think the hard thing, it's a great question, I think, from their end. And often I think the relatively easy but dumb answer and kind of sad answer is just USDC payments kind of across chain. Outside of that, why don't you feel like the adoption on chain or any killer app has really taken off?
I have a few theses here. So one is kind of pointing back. I don't think there's enough product and front end people in Web3 for our scale. Like, if we probably took a ratio of developers, we still are probably much more infrastructure heavy right now. But our infrastructure has actually gotten to the point now where we can build high quality apps. So, things like a Snapchat are literally possible now, whereas they weren't really possible 3 years ago. I think there's also a habit for us to think about, how does crypto solve our problems, or like, how does crypto exist in the world in our lens, rather than what problem are we solving with crypto. And there isn't like a clear solution to this because like everyone's sort of resource constrained, like we are, I'm sure everyone is. But I think there is a bit of a mentality shift of like, okay, crypto problems are not real world problems, or like they're not yet. So is there a way for maybe Web 2.5 type of ideas to froth up and then, with a more Web 3 roadmap, but at least solving some Web 2 related problems first, not just being, a Web 3 focused protocol or product?
It does make a lot of sense. I've been frustrated, I think, by the industry in large part just because I feel like application engineers have to focus on infrastructure. And unfortunately, there's now, well, I guess it's a good thing. Ultimately, there's many different options and engineers have many different choices to build upon on multiple different layer ones or different layer twos. It's a hard choice. And for engineers to kind of decide where to build. Do you think ultimately the industry will have multiple layer twos, multiple L1s, hundreds or thousands, or do you think they'll ultimately kind of be coalesced on a couple few?
So, from the Graph's perspective, because we are blockchain agnostic, I think the future is different chains, different instances of rollups, different forks, all of the above. And so for our purposes, it really doesn't matter because, again, we're trying to create the standard that if you're a developer building, let's say on Optimism, if you wanted to go build on Celo tomorrow, that there's the infrastructure there that you don't have to think about it very much. Because I agree, like we don't want DApp developers to think about infrastructure. They should focus on product. I do think that there will be certain ecosystems that thrive more than others. And those could be based on network effects. They could be based on sort of the access, to specific developer communities or partnerships. So, seeing things like Optimism that, I am a board member of as well, but, seeing Coinbase really get excited about launching a rollup, to me, that positions the Optimism ecosystem with some unique benefits than maybe others. But I don't expect there necessarily to be a winner take all because just human nature, even if one of us like to chain more than the other, I think there's going to be people that choose different chains for different trade-offs.
You mentioned Coinbase. I think it maybe caught the industry a little bit by surprise. What are your thoughts around Base, the L2 that Coinbase is launching, and how do you think it'll kind of push forward the industry?
Again, I'm a board member of Optimism, so I'm biased, but I'm personally very excited. I think this is like the new foray of the bridge of CeFi into more proper DeFi, and everything that's happened over the past year has been really unfortunate, but we've learned a lot. So I think it's very noble of Coinbase to really take this next step of decentralization and caring about their users and what the future looks like. I expect that there will be a lot more of this kind of behavior, not necessarily a centralized exchange, but just teams, maybe existing Web 2 teams or new products that favor creating their own roll-up ecosystem, maybe for cost reasons, maybe for, experience reasons. And then, having things like the Optimism superchain or, either cross-chain bridges, if those are safe, that actually blend those ecosystems together. I think the end vision is that a user should never even be able to choose which network they have to switch between. Like the fact that we still do that on Metamask is insane. It should just be so seamless in the back end. There's some routing going on based on whichever action the user wanted to take in the front end. So we're probably a bit away from that, but I think the future is a lot more unified than we kind of think about today.
I was surprised it took MetaMask so long to integrate NFTs and being able to see NFTs in the wallet. So I was super excited once they finally got that shipped.
Yeah, totally. And I'm excited to see like gaming, hasn't really taken off yet. Like what does that experience look like from a wallet? How do we blend our worlds a little bit more? Whereas today in Web 2, we have a bank and then we've got our gaming console. Like ultimately with crypto, these assets can be interchangeable or we're just very easily accessible from the same wallet. So how does our experience change?
True. Maybe shifting a little bit, you were also involved with eGirl Capital. Could you talk about how that kind of group of investors ultimately came about and how it got formed?
Yeah, so we like to call ourselves an amorphous collective of investors. Really it started just from shared interests, sharing a lot of information and realizing that we were fairly values aligned on some of the places that we wanted to invest our time and capital. And then we were also very involved in the DAO space. So these two things kind of blended together. We've been investing, I think, now for over 2 years. And I would say what's cool is, because everyone kind of has their own full-time job or other gig going on, we don't have this requirement or pressure of needing to invest. We don't have any LPs, and we really only go by what's values aligned. So it gives us flexibility to only support the projects that we really believe in. And then also, we're here to, create content, create cultural movements. Some of the work that CL has been doing is a little bit more on the side of the arts. We've got people like Loomdart, who has his own NFT project. So really, we're here to be an ecosystem player and support our projects as much as we can.
That's amazing. And
we're anonymous.
Yeah.
Pseudonymous.
You got a lot of different things coming together to make that happen. And I think by not having LPs and being able to solely kind of focus on the projects that you're truly deeply passionate about makes you guys very aligned with the founders and the builders that you're investing with. Can you talk about any particular projects that eGirl Capital did invest in and ultimately some of the thesis behind it?
Yeah, I would say overall our thesis is supporting decentralized applications and infrastructure that we think are vital for the future. Really thinking about what is necessary, beyond these sort of early stages of crypto, and what do we think will be foundational. So we've got a few projects like Connext, Alchemix. We've even got some more artistic ones like Oh Baby Games. And again, because we don't have any LPs, we don't sort of have this very strict thesis that we have to follow. And we're really trying to, cover the breadth, so really looking at what are the high quality players across the verticals in Web3. So I think at this point, we've probably invested in everything from DeFi to NFTs to infrastructure. And, we don't really have a quota or anything like that. It's really whichever projects we see, following the trends, really doing our own research, and also following the community. We want to do things that actually make sense and are net beneficial.
Amazing. And I guess for like the founders and engineers that are listening to this podcast, is there like anything that you can disclose on like average check size or how to get in contact with the eGirl Capital team for a potential investment? Yeah, I would say check size really varies. Again, because we are a collective, not every member even is investing. It really is a decision of the group of if we as a collective want to invest, and then, how much really differs. In terms of advice, I would say if you have something interesting, get in contact with a member of eGirl. But, we're really looking for proof of concept. So ideally, if the project has, some evidence or some go to market already, that would be excellent. And then, we are looking for innovators. So, copycats are great, for things like yield farming. But we really want to make sure we're investing in high quality projects. So eGirl Capital, you have kind of very check size, but you're more trying to advance the industry as a whole. Are there any particular things, though, that interest you? Maybe even outside of the graph, we talked a little bit about the social side with the creator economy. We talked a little bit on gaming, but holistically, is there anything that you're uniquely excited about for maybe the rest of 2023? Yeah, I have a few answers here. So the obvious one is AI. Naturally, it's on everyone's mind. What's really unique for us at the Graph is we work with data. We actually use AI even in our own sort of core development processes. But I'm really interested in figuring out how the Graph as an open data foundation can work with language models and what that future looks like for AI and crypto. The second thing that I'm kind of excited about is, like if you go and look, what are the top apps on Apple or Android? Most of them are social and gaming. Like you got a few of your like email or your Google Calendar, but most of them are like the Snapchats of the world, the Instagrams. And I don't think we've quite created that type of application. And when I think about what makes that kind of application, like no one really cares about what's going on in the back end. It's all about the experience that's being provided to the user. So I'm excited to see more innovation at the experience layer. A lot of that could be gaming because I don't think we've quite figured out the crypto gaming connection. There's been quite a bit of hostility even from the gaming community on creating NFT marketplaces, all these things. But I'm really keen to see like, what is that app that's going to make it onto the leaderboard of, the Apple App Store where people don't even realize crypto's in the back end. And I think there's always,
headway made from teams like Uniswap and everything, but even those are very crypto native products. Where is the product where you don't know it's crypto native, but the experience is so wonderful, you're using it just because you like the app?
Yeah. Being able to kind of abstract the complexity of blockchains, but keeping the properties that we all have kind of loved that blockchains uniquely enable, I think is the challenging aspect. And there is a lot of friction in today's applications, and being able to, one, kind of support scale, but two, just making that seamless user experience. It is a challenging endeavor.
Yeah, I mean, I would go farther and say it's not even user experience. It's like, what are we trying to build? Like, what do we want our users to be using? Like, literally, I'm sure when Snapchat came out, there was a whole innovative process of like, people want to send nudes or they want to send things that disappear. And that was the crux of the discussion, not, okay, we're going to figure out how to use the internet to make people have more fun. Like, maybe that's where it started, but it was more likely something around the product experience that they wanted to generate and then figuring out the stack around it. And I want to challenge the community to do a bit more of that.
I fully agree. In terms of maybe your favorite product that is Web3 related, do you have a personal favorite?
I mean, I love ENS. I know that's a bit of like, that's a product and a protocol, but I think that's, a huge foundation that we haven't quite seen the full utility of. Like, how do we embed ENS into our daily lives? What else do I like? There's like the standard ones like a Zapper, the portfolio managers. There is some of the work that Shibuya People Pleaser is doing, I think is really exciting. So the concept of like on-chain auction houses and just fundamentally changing that model. Although I'm not technically a user, I am following some of that work. Let me think what else. EPNS, the notification protocol. I think they're really exciting. And again, they're a protocol, so I don't know if they have one product, but the concept of creating notification systems and messaging embedded into our applications, I think we'll see a lot more of that.
Yeah. It's I was a big fan of ENS. I think I got my first name .eth, and then unfortunately I lost the wallet, and it's sad, but so I had to scoop my name on other chains just to make myself feel better.
That's a good one. Or you could do a last name and also make a subdomain of your own name.
Definitely. In terms of kind of maybe just a little bit more like personal on your career side of things, what advice would you give to women, to people, to college students that are interested in Web3 and maybe are excited about the growth, want to get involved, but maybe don't know where to start?
The first thing I'd say is like there's a great filter of risk tolerance that people need to get past. So, like leaving consulting, it was definitely a big decision if I wanted to leave this very cushy, exciting job. I think there's a lot of fear around that concept of how am I going to get paid? What does the future look like? And there definitely are risks, like a lot of people in crypto get paid via crypto and then they cash out to their banks when they're ready to pay their bills. But I would encourage people to sort of surpass that because it's sort of like a trivial delay or challenge for all these benefits of being in this really exciting industry and working on new things. I would also say, being a non-technical person myself, there's a lot of stigma around how do business-minded or product-minded people get involved because they don't see the direct access point. They see blockchain and they're like, oh, engineering, I have to be an engineer. And crypto is just like any industry. Like in the oil and gas industry, you don't need to know everything about oil and gas. You need to also be a marketer and, a BD person or whatever it might be. So I would encourage people that, if you're not seeing the job posting that you want, go contact that team and ask if they need your role, because we're so early that people don't even realize their team structures. Like everyone doesn't have crypto experience. A lot of people are millennials or younger, meaning they don't even have necessarily proper leadership experience, that having someone come up to them and say, hey, I'd love to do these things and maybe I'll work as a grantee or maybe I'll join your DAO, but this is where I want to go and these are the things I can provide, is often the way that we've hired in the past. Is, we see people just standing up in the community and we realize, we need someone doing that full time, join us full time. So I think there's a lot of this dog fooding, getting involved early in different places to figure out where you are. But I would say definitely do not be discouraged if you don't see your role, because it might be that the teams don't even realize they need your role.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think, I mean, personally, it is very intimidating, even on the engineering side of things. There's so many debates, even on blockchain architecture, that I think even the different communities would argue about what is correct and what is kind of the path forward for the industry. So even if you're technical, there's lots of nuance and always more to learn. In terms of your personal like journey and how you kind of overcame some of those hurdles on being a little bit more non-technical but wanting to get involved, what made you really want to personally make that jump yourself?
Yeah, good question. So definitely my brother, helping me helped a lot. Having a mentor or somebody that can explain some of the concepts to you from the inside is definitely very beneficial. But I would say the bigger thing I did was two things. I made a conscious decision to be on Twitter. There was literally a day where I was like, I'm going to delete all of these crappy college tweets and I'm going to go full blown crypto, follow the right people, really, embed myself in a way that I knew what was going on, because I realized that the public square of crypto is on Twitter. And so you just want to know, like you want to have the information basically accessible. So that's really big. If you log into Twitter even once a day, you'll get a dump of new info, whether it was like a new regulation or just a new project launching. And that's a great way to learn. The second thing I did, I was lucky that I was able to take a few weeks off work to properly embed myself. And I was watching YouTube videos every single day. I was watching like Vlad talk about Casper, consensus mechanism, just like random videos from engineers, researchers, business people to fully grasp what all these concepts meant and where I thought was interesting. So to me, again, payments were very interesting. The concept of access to banking for people who don't have access. And so a lot of the content I was looking into was sort of these payment related components. And then I eventually worked at Omise Go. But I think there's, a world of content out there where you can do a lot of self-teaching. It's really just taking the time to do it and then not being afraid to ask questions. Like even early on, I would sometimes just tweet a stupid question and then I get some people debating in my mentions and I was like, oh, damn it. But the next day I'm like, wow, I just like fundamentally understand this way better than I did yesterday. And there's these kinds of moments that you're like, aha, I now understand a little bit more about what's happening. And then you can keep going deeper in the technical side if you want to, or that could be the moment you engage with another team and say, hey, I now understand enough to work for you.
100%. And it's kind of funny that the blockchain community has kind of coalesced on Twitter, but I love it. I appreciate that it's the town square. We often kind of do get in kind of knife fights just with like either architectures or different point of views, but it's fun. And for those people that are interested, it's almost mandatory that you be on Twitter, in my opinion. If someone says that they're in the blockchain industry, but not on Twitter, I'm like, I don't know if you're really following along that closely.
Yeah, I would say you don't necessarily have to participate. So like you don't have to feel pressured to be the one commenting, but you definitely need to be on Twitter to know what's going on. Because I find, major reporting institutions are actually reporting often on the news broken on Twitter. So, for alpha reasons, for your own project reasons, it makes sense to just learn from Twitter.
100%, 100%. In terms of kind of maybe some of the headwinds that the industry is facing, I think the US particularly has kind of set a little bit of a bearish tone and not providing a lot of clarity to companies or protocols or teams building in the US. What is your personal opinion on maybe some of the headwinds that the US is going to face in terms of kind of getting mainstream adoption approved by the regulators?
My honest opinion is I feel it's a bit of a distraction. And, maybe that's the intent, is for regulators to distract us so much that we can't ship as fast. But it is, if you ask any protocol team, regulatory discussions make up quite a bit of time that could otherwise be spent on innovation or just like continuing to ship. I think that there is a world where things get solved. There are a lot of lobbyists. There's, the Coinbase efforts, the Ripple efforts, and that would be a best case scenario. But most teams like ours are really thinking globally, and not only for their regulatory concerns today, but simply, relying on one jurisdiction is just not scalable. It's not resilient. It's really not what we're doing here. So even when you look at Ethereum, yes, Ethereum might have a US presence, but it has equally large presence globally, if not larger. And that's really what we're all focusing on, is how do we make sure that whatever attack vector exists, whether it's political, jurisdictional, systemic, where maybe it's like a certain payment system excluding us, that we then have other ways to keep these platforms and protocols running, and that we have the communities. So for example, the graph, we're focusing heavily on India and China and the rest of Asia this year. We did a lot of work in South America last year, and really making sure that there's not only the education, but the empowerment on the ground for people to then start up their own meetup or educate other people and bring in more of their local community into crypto.
Yeah, I think the globalization efforts are super important. And even if the US kind of shoots itself in the foot, at least momentarily, that those efforts do not stop and we continue to build kind of outside of the US, as unfortunate as it may be. Do you feel like you've seen teams on a large part, even when you're talking to them on the graph side of things, have kind of started to think more about building outside of the US?
I don't know if there's been a lot of like active assimilation, like let's leave, but there has been a lot more active planning of having non-US contributors. Again, like really focusing on the development of ecosystems outside of the US. And I think actually the greater focus of teams like the Graph on non-US communities actually puts way more pressure on the US. So if we maintain the status quo of trying to still kind of harbor everything in the US, that isn't a lot of competitive pressure for the US. But once the US sees other jurisdictions doing really interesting things, like I saw the UK came out with something recently, Dubai is really, at the forefront. This really just doesn't leave the US with many options. So I would say the more that we actually globalize, the stronger our case becomes in the US and the more resilient our networks become.
100%. It's a tricky place to be at the moment for builders and founders, even investors. Not having the clarity is definitely frustrating. I hope we can, hopefully the US kind of rights the wrongs and gives everybody a little bit better of a framework to start evaluating these things. On the investor side, though, I think one of the other hardships in the investing world is, as much as we enjoy number go up, there's been a lot of blow ups and a lot of kind of pitfalls in the industry, especially in this last bull market, that you just need to avoid. What have you kind of learned from, like, on the investing side and being a prominent investor in the space about avoiding things as much as wanting to ape into things?
Great question, because I definitely do some degen things on the side myself. I think that any investor, and I'm not a full-time investor, so I really can't speak for the venture capital industry, but I would assume any investor is always looking at whether this thing will be around. And a lot of the perspective I've now taken being on the builder side is not only is this thing going to be around, but is the team building it going to be sustained until the thing ships? And I think that's actually really underestimated how much momentum is needed to ship something. And in crypto, because we're working on protocols which are inherently more complex, have longer roadmaps, the certainty of the resourcing is actually much more needed. You can kind of assume a Web2 team will be around maybe for a year to ship the MVP and then maybe wait for the next funding round. Whereas in crypto, things don't normally happen in 1 year. It might take 3 years, 5 years, as we've seen in Ethereum and other places. And so how do you maintain that momentum? How do you ensure that people aren't burning out, that there's enough resourcing? So I think that's the biggest challenge here is for us to figure out how do you scale beyond the original teams, because networks themselves are so much more difficult to actually grow.
Yeah, the original team is hard. And I guess that kind of goes back to the progressive decentralization or the ethos of the industry is kind of build it, get some amount of product market fit. And at some point down the line, hopefully the community or the incentives of the network allows the operators, even outside of the direct contributors, to add value to that network. Have you thought more so about that progressive decentralization aspect?
Yeah, so I completely agree. And from the Graph side, we do a lot of things like launching our Graph Advocates program and our DAOs as means of scaling our efforts. So sharing culture and then scaling so other people who aren't that founding team can contribute. Going off of sort of what you said, coming from the investor perspective again, I think that's such an important consideration that you might be investing in that team because often early stage you are, but what you should be investing is in that team and the future potential of another team to succeed that initial team and whether there is a path to get there. So like when you're assessing a protocol, part of your assessment is there a community and momentum forming around this protocol that like it's not just going to die tomorrow if the founders get tired or if there isn't adoption. And so when you're thinking about like these DeFi projects, especially at this sort of late stage of the DeFi cycle, past DeFi summer, the question is this going to be useful? Is there going to be a team that continues working on this by the next bull market cycle? And if the answer is no, then it's not really a good investment. If the answer is, hey, maybe not this team, but there's a community that would then continue that progress, then maybe it's a good investment. And we've definitely seen that happen. Things like the Nouns ecosystem, I think, are really interesting to watch, where they've really built in a core group of contributors that continuously like feed in, and their DAO has very strong values, even beyond just the first initial few members.
Yeah, it's the Nouns DAO particularly is a very interesting model where they auction off one every day and have a large treasury. I'm interested to see where that ultimately goes.
I actually think this is maybe one of the more revolutionary unexplored models. And it's very similar to Malik Dao, where like you do have this like sponsorship of new members or rejection of members. But what they've done is they have this auction. So you're constantly adding in new members and all the funding is going to one treasury. And I don't think we've seen that behavior from many projects at all, regardless of NFTs or not. Usually when they're like NFT sales, it's going maybe to the pocket of a team and then maybe there's some split. But they are really embodying this concept of like every decision is being made by the collective of the DAO, which is really unique.
It is super unique. I'm definitely watching it with a keen eye. I think maybe going back to 2017, at that point in time, I would say the exciting things before the ICO market was Bitcoin. And then Ethereum came along and kind of had smart contracts. A lot of tokens got launched, not very many products, but a lot of tokens. And then unfortunately in 2018, when that kind of token hype came down, a lot of the Bitcoiners were kind of dancing on Ethereum's graves. Do you think, and then I think Ethereum and the core community really that stuck around during that non-consensus time was the thing that really pushed the industry forward, got the applications built. What do you feel like today are like the more non-consensus bets within crypto that are maybe unpopular, but that you have like maybe higher conviction?
It's interesting that you bring up Bitcoin, because I personally have not been following the development space as much until recently with the ordinals excitement and just this whole new world basically of potential smart contracts and unique applications. And I think that's actually very controversial in Bitcoin. I don't know, where that's going to go. My sources tell me that there's been a lot of progress made on Lightning, that Lightning is actually now prime time ready, which is kind of like in Ethereum world, rollups are now prime time ready. So there could be this moment that all of these trends coalescing actually fundamentally change the Bitcoin community, where there's still some sort of more Bitcoin asset maxis, and there's another cohort that's more interested in evolving Bitcoin. So, as a general trend, I think we are going to see bifurcation of L1 ecosystems on what is the actual purpose of that L1. So, up until now, Bitcoin has been sort of this asset space. Is there a world where there's applications? I think we're going to start seeing similar conversations across other L1s like Solana, Near, Binance Smart Chain, figuring out what is the unique thing that they add value to crypto that maybe other chains don't. And through that, I think we'll also see a lot of displacement of, people leaving certain chains for other ecosystems once they realize where they align the most with the values.
I fully agree. I think every chain kind of needs to, one, build a community, but also what is their unique value prop outside of just being like an EVM clone.
Yeah.
Is there any, in your mind, is there any possibility that ETH in the future is not the dominant smart contract platform? Or do you feel like Ethereum already has such network effects that there can't be surpassed?
My personal perspective is ETH is dominant. My graph perspective is it doesn't matter, right? Like here, again, we're here to serve equally every chain. And so we do. Back to my personal perspective, I do think that in technology and in industries, there's this habit that not always the best technology wins because of other things. And those other things might be network effects, education. And I think that is at play with Ethereum. That's not to say that Ethereum is not